Okay, we know that Hitler's regime, the Nazis, are determined to suppress and destroy any opposition to their regime. However, there are some groups and there are some individuals in Nazi Germany who have the bravery, who have the courage, and are determined to stand up to the Nazi regime. Let's have a think about them. One group of opponents of the regime were young people, youth opposition to the Nazi regime. And they come under the name or the banner of the Edelweiss Pirates. Several gangs existed in Nazi Germany before the outbreak of the Second World War who didn't like the Nazi message, who were opposed to joining the Hitler Youth. They had various names. The Navajos was one gang. Eventually, during the Second World War, all of these various gangs would take on the name of the Edelweiss Pirates. And they wore the flower, the Edelweiss, as a little badge so that they could recognise other members who had similar thoughts and similar feelings. What did they do? During the Second World War, the Allies, the British, the Americans would drop propaganda leaflets attacking Hitler, and they would gather these leaflets up and they would have the bravery and the courage to post them through people's letterboxes. When they went hiking or camping, they would hope to sometimes instigate fights or beat up any members of the Hitler Youth they came across. And during the Second World War, they managed to assassinate and execute a member of the Gestapo. As a consequence of this, I think this was in Cologne, several of the leaders of the Edelweiss Pirates, young boys in their teens, were publicly executed by the Nazis to show this is what happens if you stand up to the regime. So, okay, that's one group of youth opponents. Another group of young people who were prepared to act against the regime were known as the White Rose Group. These were a group of university students in Munich who went to the university in Munich, and in 1941, appalled by the treatment of the Jews during the war and fearful of the consequences of the Second World War upon Germany, begin to write and distribute anti-Nazi leaflets and send out letters to people anonymously criticising the regime. They are caught when they decide to distribute some pamphlets in their university. They are caught, they are arrested by the Gestapo, and they confess. So they are put on trial. They fly in this famous fanatical judge to put them on trial, and they very bravely stand up and argue back against him during this show trial. They're all found guilty. Most famously, Hans and Sophie Scholl, the brother and sister, are publicly, again, not publicly, they are executed by guillotine, and other members of the group are arrested, and some are in prison, some are executed. So that's the White Rose Group, very famous group of opponents to the regime. Okay, who else is opposed to the Nazis? The church, as you would imagine, totally opposed to Nazi ideology. Some churchmen, some priests, some pastors have the courage of their convictions and stand up against the regime. Most famously, Niemöller, a member of the confessional church, is appalled by the fact that some churchmen are giving their support to Hitler, becomes a vocal critic of Hitler and the Nazis. He is imprisoned, sent to Sachsenhausen concentration camp as a result of that, survives the war. Another minister, a guy called Dietrich Bonhoeffer, again is a critic of the regime, but he is arrested and he is murdered by the Nazis. So the church does put up some resistance to the regime. Perhaps the most famous example of opposition to the regime comes from the army. By the middle of the war, 43, 44, many members of the army, high-ranking members of the army, generals, field marshals, realised that the war is now becoming a disaster for Germany. Hitler is leading Germany into the abyss, so a group of them tried to assassinate Hitler, and the most famous example of this is Operation Valkyrie, when a German officer, von Stauffenberg, who has access to Hitler's headquarters, the Wolf Slayer, plans to execute him with a timing device bomb left in his conference table, by his conference table. The plan is very clever. After the explosion, after Hitler is killed, the army expects to take over the country and try to reach an agreement with the British and the Americans to bring the war to a close. The plot fails. Hitler is only injured, not killed. All those associated with the plot are captured or shot. Von Stauffenberg himself is shot almost immediately. Others are put on a show trial, and Hitler will have them executed in the most grisly manner. And he will survive, and the war will continue for over another year with disastrous consequences for America. So there is opposition to the regime. Let's recap. Okay, opposition. Youth opposition. The Edelweiss Pirates. The White Rose Group, Hans and Sophie Scholl. The church opposition, most notably Niemöller and Dietrich Bonhoeffer. And then finally, members of the army, Operation Valkyrie, von Stauffenberg's attempt to blow up Hitler in the July plot of 1944. Okay, that's opposition to Hitler.